celebrating faith and connections to country, looking for synergies, and above all, hope, especially given the week we're having. We are here in the heart of the Parliamentary Triangle, and for those of you who are from outside Canberra, this is a very special place. Welcome. This, of course, is an event that's part of a National Care for Creation pilgrimage. It's wonderful to have those of you who've been on this pilgrimage. Put your hand up if you've been on the pilgrimage. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Wonderful. Well done, you. It's an event, part of this pilgrimage, which Wellspring, the community of Wellspring, is undertaking with the Iona community based in Scotland. And of course, as I suggested, it comes at a particular time, a moment, doesn't it? Full of pathos, as well as the possibilities, we hope, of genuine healing and learning. So the agenda is as follows, loosely. We'll have a welcome to country. I'll introduce you to Jonathan, who's acting executive director here, who help Tony lead a welcome to country. And then we're going to have a conversation. Then there'll be an opportunity for the panelists, who I'll introduce, to talk to us about caring for people, caring for yourself, for people, for nature, for country. And the invitation is for you to listen with your head and your heart, to bring what's here. And then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. You'll have an opportunity to find the granular truths or actions for yourself. And there'll be a moment to participate as well with an art project at the back of the hall. And then there'll be a summary and a formal blessing. So the mic situation is interesting. I was hoping to be at the lectern and we can't. So Jonathan's going to step into this seat. It's a pleasure now for me to introduce a friend and colleague, the acting executive director here at the Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture, Jonathan Cole.
Hello. Whoa. Okay, I got the good mic. Well, it is an absolute privilege to welcome all of you here to the Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture, and in particular to our chapel, which is located on this very special piece of land at the heart of our nation's capital. The Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture is a partnership between the Anglican Diocese of Canberra-Goulburn and Charles Sturt University. And we were established 25 years ago to be a place for not only the expression of, but also reflection on Christian spirituality in Australian history and culture. We have a national and inclusive identity. We are ecumenical and interfaith by temperament and disposition. And we also have a very keen commitment to atonement and reconciliation with the First Peoples of Australia. So we are absolutely delighted to be in a position to sponsor this particular event, partnering with the Wellbeing Community of Australia and the Iona community in Scotland. That's all from me. It's now also my pleasure to invite to the stage Tony Liston to bless us with an acknowledgement of country. And I'm going to give him the good mic.
Thank you very much. I'm not used to holding a microphone in front of me, but I've been asked to give an acknowledgement. Tony, it's not a welcome. I cannot do a welcome because I'm not Ngunnawal. I am Wiradjuri, which is the tribe immediately to the west of Canberra. And I've been asked to do that in my own First Nation Wiradjuri language, which I would like to do for you. So, Iradumarang Mujigalang, Yundu Yandani, Jirmadalinya Wiradjuri Gibir, Nadu Banigugubara, Ngunnawal Nurambanga, Ngunnawal Mangalang, Nangu Nurambanga, Nina Nangira Durinyagai. So what I said was, the day is good, my friends. My name is Anthony. I'm a proud Wiradjuri man, and I wish to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people and the Ngunnawal nation on whose traditional land this assembly is being held. Thank you. Tony?
Thanks so much. What a great name, eh? Thanks, Tony. I just want to set the tone. I think there's maybe just a moment for us to gather ourselves, to take a deep breath or two, to notice the light, to be present with ourselves at the molecular level, to sort of appreciate we come in bodies and we come with so many connections and extraordinary lived experiences. And to see this afternoon as being asset rich, that we are gifted, that we were born blessed, and that every word, while not saying, you know, is precious, because then we could trip up. We want to be gentle with each other this afternoon, while also acknowledging the power of words. Now, the aim of today is to bring First Nations people and representatives of the Iona community in Scotland together, and to provide space where wisdom from the Celtic strand and the Iona community's tradition and First Nations spirituality of country can contribute towards deepening Australia. Now, Australia is a construct, but this nation's spiritual relationship to land, the divine, found in and behind creation, and justice for our First Nations people or First Nations people. This is a huge topic. We're going to just touch the corners of it, right? But it is a wonderful time, given the wonderful and difficult week we're in, to share something of our faith journeys, to find epiphany and connection, and fundamentally to talk about values. What is it that we want to reaffirm as values that help the walk? How do we see, what are ways of seeing and acting that helps us purposely go forward? So I want to introduce you to the panel, and if you could step up and sit with us, that would be lovely. Reverend Ruth Harvey is the leader of the Iona community in Scotland, a minister with the Church of Scotland, and also a Quaker, and a recent co-convener of the Citizens' Climate Assembly in Scotland. Welcome, Ruth. Ruth joined the Iona community exactly 30 years ago and has been involved in actively growing a network of faith-based reconciliation groups across the UK. Well done. You're also an artist. Would you say? Okay. Thank you. Brooke Prentis comes from a long line of strong Aboriginal women. She identifies with her nan as a Waka Waka woman from Queensland. Brooke does wear many hats, from chartered accountant way back to community pastor. She's a former CEO of Common Grace, a movement of people heralding Jesus and justice, as the first Aboriginal person to lead a national Christian organisation in Australia. Welcome, Brooke. And Sam Faulkner. Sam is a Torres Strait Islander and Aboriginal woman from Barton and Moa Islands in the Torres Strait, and the Yuragana and Withathi people of Cape York, far north Queensland. She's an author and editor, she's a published poet, and she's been in Canberra many years engaged with Catholic ministry in this city. Welcome, Sam. Now, there are other people who are joining our yarning circle. I think Joy, are you joining us? Joy Connor is a Wellspring co-leader who gave me a delightfully warm hug when I came into to the room. So thank you. And Sally. Is it Sally? Yes, welcome. Thanks, Sally. Sally is a Marrawara woman from Cunnamulla and Warana country. I got that right, Sally? Good. Wonderful. It's interesting and worth naming and acknowledging that these are all women, that we have a women-only panel with engagements and interests in expressions of faith and creative expressions generally. I think that's pretty cool. All right, so I want Joy just to quickly kick us off with a brief outline of the pilgrimage and how it's been going and why it matters.
I've only been part of the pilgrimage on the ground since last week, but we've been working on the pilgrimage for the last 18 months to 2 years. And our organisation, Wellspring, is where we see ourselves as a place where spirituality and justice meet. And we're an inclusive community, including people of various sexualities, many races, and many different denominations, and people who are not in any denomination at all. But as a group, we felt we had to look at what was needed in our country. And we were very, very aware that there was a huge need for justice as far as our climate was concerned. And the second thing was there was a huge need for justice to our First Nations people. And we thought, well, instead of having small conferences where we only invite our friends and all the Wellspring people, we should throw it open to everyone and have something across the country and include the people who inspired the beginning of Wellspring, who was Iona, and their spirituality, which is very, very similar to ours. And so we asked them if they'd like to come and decided that's what we do. And the day we decided, would you believe, was the election. And what did the Prime Minister say? Not that it's always been the best thing he's done, but he was going to do something about those two issues. And we thought, great, well, we are too. And so we've had pilgrimages. The pilgrimage started when Ruth and Nick arrived in Perth at Wadgenup Island, where they were welcomed, Rottnest Island, where they were welcomed on the beach with a smoking ceremony from a local elder, on through to Perth, then Adelaide, where they've been having amazing connections to the land and even time out on an Aboriginal community, listening to wise people out there. Then on to Alice Springs, where they've had fabulous relationships and listening times with Aboriginal people in quiet places, and also to the people from the huge variety of communities who work together in Alice Springs to try and make the world the sort of place that reflects God's kingdom on earth. Then down to Melbourne and on the island of what's called Gragan in Aboriginal, but Raymond Island, we found a lot of healing had happened. And what we wanted to find out was, how did that healing happen? And we still haven't found all of the answers. But what we found is that older Aboriginal people, despite the terrible messes so many missionaries had made, had the deepest, most gracious, loving hearts and were ready to talk to people in the churches and outside of goodwill. And the amazing things that have happened, not that there's not some horrible stuff still down there, but we were really, really impressed about how much it depends on networks of people working together, quiet little ones that nobody knows about. And so we're continuing here to listen, because peace only comes if we're ready to listen. And we know the mess the world's in because there hasn't been listening. And we are hoping that we will help people to listen to each other, to listen to the earth, to listen to different cultures, and above all, listen to their own hearts and the connection that their hearts have to our land, to our Creator, and to each other. So that's what the pilgrimage is about. And it's lovely to have all these people here from Canberra as part of our pilgrimage. It's such a treat. So thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Well, let's kick off our conversation. Ruth, to you first. How were you drawn to the Celtic Iona faith community in the first place back in 1993? And how has it changed how you live your life, how you are, how you be?
Thank you, Tony. Is it easier if I think it might be easier if I stand up? I will answer your question, but I want just to take off my scarf so you can see, and I'm going to leave Brooke to say, are you going to say something about it, or shall I say a bit already? Brooke will add more, but this was gifted to me. Do folks know about the climate scarf? A hauntingly beautiful offering that tells us, and I'm going to lay it down here, tells us the story in 100 years of climate statistics. It's a shocking story, and it's not over. Let me leave it at that. So your question, I actually came to this community exactly 57 years ago, which is my age, because I'm one of these people, I just landed, you know, happenstance of life, you will have your happenstance. I had no choice about where I was born, who my parents were, or where they took me at that stage. And already since coming to these lands now called Australia, I'm realizing that many parents and children lost that choice along the way. The story is never simple. So I also want to begin by saying thank you to everyone who's arranged this pilgrimage, Joy and others, and Brooke for being a pilgrim with us. It is opening my heart and changing my mind about so many things. But my happenstance in life, my thrownness, as I think some theologian, I think it was Bultmann, has said, I happened to be born into a Presbyterian family in Glasgow in the 1960s, into the Gorbals group community. And it's instructive to me that the first 5 years of my life were lived in what was then, I think, called the worst slum in Western Europe. By that, they meant the worst housing, that the area had been looked after the worst by the corporation, the Glasgow Corporation. The housing was falling down. The grand terraced houses were inhabited initially by what we called tobacco lords, those who made their money, their wealth. These Victorian buildings, Victorian men mostly, made their wealth from trading tobacco. When they got wealthy, they moved to the suburbs, and into those buildings came Irish immigrants. Daniel, a nod to all those with Irish heritage here. The story in Scotland is a very mixed story, and into those houses came hundreds and hundreds and thousands of Irish immigrants, and they were ignored, they were abandoned. And it was into those streets that my parents moved as part of a Christian experiment and living alongside the poor, always acknowledging that they had choice to leave. And so that choice and power will be a theme, I'm sure, in our conversations. We then moved for the next 5 years of my life. You'll not get the whole history, don't worry, to Iona, which is an island, off an island, off an island. Britain is the island, Mull is a big island, and Iona is off that island, or it's an island off the coast of Ireland. Iona was part of the motorway of the seas that connected us. And I lived there for 5 years till I was 10, growing up in ecumenical Christian, dispersed and intentional community. I had no idea what those words meant. So I then moved to Stirling, and this is the last chunk, which is a town in the centre of Scotland where sectarianism, so that means the battles between the Protestants and the Catholics, is rife and still is very written into the landscape, such that in my school, I couldn't play with the children in the Catholic school because we had staggered playtimes, because typically we would fight, not just me, but the children in general. So my first 15 years tell the story of Scotland. The Iona community to which I joined or became a member in 1993 was born actually in Glasgow. People talk about Iona quite rightly as a thin place where the veil between things material and things spiritual is as thin as gossamer. We say that George MacLeod, our founder, said that. We know that that image comes from many centuries before him. Iona is such a thin place. If you've swum in the freezing Atlantic in the middle of autumn, you'll know that feeling. If you've walked to St. Columba's Bay. But I truly believe that everywhere is a thin place where we have the liminality in relationships, where vulnerable, honest sharing meets compassionate listening. There is thinness. So don't let anybody tell you that it's only assigned to special remote places, remote from the city centres. Thinness exists centrally. And I just want to say maybe three things, Tony, about, and I'll be brief, about the impulses that keep me involved in my community, the Iona community, which is my happenstance. It's not unique, it's just particular. We will all have our particulars. Ian Bradley has written a book, which is one of the few books I've brought with me, Following the Celtic Way. He revised his academic research into Celtic spirituality after 25 years of basing it loosely around the revival in the 18th, 19th century, which spawned many romantic stories about Celtic spirituality. And one of the first things he would say is, be wary of Celtic reinvention. When we're talking about Celtic spirituality, we need to be clear what we're talking about. He would say, and this was scripted before I met Daniel, he would say, we're really talking about Irish spirituality, because most Scots have Irish lineage. And what Columba brought was a spirituality inspired by Patrick, from Ireland to Scotland and then down. It met Augustinian spirituality, and there's the story of the multiple layers of Christian faith in Scotland. But we're now a multicultural society where there are hundreds and millions of Muslims and Hindus and Jews and Baha'i and Zoroastrian and people of no faith. So to say that we're a Celtic nation is obviously not true. We have a strong Celtic heritage. Ian Bradley would say that we need to look back to the golden age, 4th to 7th century monastic period. And he's written about 21 aspects of Celtic spirituality. The three that I'm going to end with are penitence, pilgrimage, and prayer. I think they're pertinent for us today. Penitence, the ability to say sorry. That involves deep listening. John Paul Lederach is my mentor here. He, in his book, The Moral Imagination, talks deeply and widely about the arts and the disciplines needed for radical transformative listening, building deep relationships, having paradoxical curiosity about the other, being innately risk-taking and creative in your attempts to build relationship. So as we look at penitence, and we pray every day in the Iona community that we seek forgiveness for our wrongs, and we receive that forgiveness from Jesus Christ. But that doesn't let us off the hook. We need to act differently. The second P that I want to, of the three, is pilgrimage. Holy walking together is a feature of the early Celtic tradition. They would go out from their monasteries and come back for replenishment. And my question to each of us here is, from where do you go out and to where do you go back as you walk into the world and come back for nourishment? We are on a pilgrimage here. I believe that COP28, those of you going, that will be a pilgrimage. With placards, that will be a pilgrimage. The tent here is a pilgrimage. We're on many pilgrimages. Some people are quiet activists and stay at home for their pilgrimage. And lastly, prayer. Riven through the life of these early monastics was a dedication to prayer. Bradley reminds us that the early Celtic monastics took some of the Egyptian traditions of prayer and lived them out in the Atlantic, which meant standing up to their necks in the sea and praying for hours on end, as the Egyptian monks would have done in slightly warmer water than we have. So it was a very embodied, prayerful spirituality, incarnational, at the heart of our Christian life. Influenced by the Celtic tradition is the incarnation. And so my plea would be that we become more embodied. We listen, we live in each other's company. We listen with our ears and with our heart in order to be changed, not just to listen to hear, but listen in order to be changed. I could go on, but I'm going to stop there.
Thanks, Ruth. Wow, well, there's quite a lot to get us started, right? Pretty powerful stuff, penitence, pilgrimage, and prayer. And we could talk a lot about what is prayer, right? Being very sick a lot of this year, that question came to the fore. What is prayer? People would say, I'm praying for you. What do you mean? I would test them. I'd say, tell me what that looks like. And I came to that prayer is listening, even though obviously when you're sick, intercession becomes a thing. But God knows what's on your heart. God knows what you need. So prayer is really a very powerful thing, obviously, and good to tease that out. Thank you, Ruth. What an extraordinary experience or set of experiences you've had. To you, Brooke, what led you to be a Christian? I understand in your early 20s. And how is your understanding of Scripture? And Scripture is animated by lived experience, and lived experience is animated by tradition. But how has your understanding of Scripture been animated by your Aboriginal heritage?
So many things that I'm thinking through, but my journey to becoming a Christian is actually based on friendship, and I share for the last 11 years as an Aboriginal Christian leader have shared a message of reconciliation as friendship, and in this week Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are processing many different things, mainly just our feelings, and processing that in different ways. It's not all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people having a week of silence this week, so please be careful of the use of the word all. It is some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and each of us need to process in our own way. But one of the things I said, I gave a State of the Nation address after the referendum last night, and I very clearly declared that reconciliation is not dead. In those 11 years, I've also talked about conciliation might be a better word. As Aboriginal Christian leaders, we've used that for a long time. But I think we don't want to change language either. Reconciliation comes out of one of the great injustices that still continues today for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Recommendation 339 from the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, that this nation must initiate a process of reconciliation. So anyway, that's what was at the forefront of my mind, because I will continue to share a message of reconciliation as friendship. But reconciliation has a much deeper meaning. It involves conciliation. And the reason conciliation, because reconciliation suggests the restoration of a broken relationship. And up until Saturday, we'd always process about that, but restoration of a broken relationship. But we have to ask ourselves really truly in light of Saturday, have we ever had a relationship to begin with? And where is our relationship? And for me, that starts with friendship. Friendship is a framework we all understand. And so how that links back to where I started my story is my friend Natalie. We met on our first day of university. She was a 4th generation Salvo from the Salvation Army. She invited me to church and kept inviting me, 4 years, and then it was boom in a Salvation Army meeting, and I became a Christian in that very moment. I guess as an Aboriginal person, I think because we experience injustice at such a young age, which is usually racism in the schoolyard, I'm very much feeling for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children that had to turn up to school this week. The racism that exists. And so you have this quest for justice. But in my life up until the age of 21, 18 when I met Natalie, I had never seen Christians involved in justice. And so the only experience of Christianity was watching the news at Easter time and Christmas time. I thought Christians were all very rich because I saw marble and gold and silver, and these big buildings, which of course today I know as cathedrals, as the news would broadcast the Easter service, like a portion of the Easter service or the Christmas service. Going to the Salvation Army, I heard the stories of William and Catherine Booth, the founders of the Salvation Army, and I realised that there were Christians who did care about poverty and justice. I then learnt about Jesus, and I do a bit of a, are there any salvos here today? Interesting. A message for the salvos that I learned about the Booths before I learned about Jesus. But then saw that Jesus was all the stories of Jesus, and that he stood and spoke up for the last, the lost and the least, which for me I had always felt was Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and still do in these lands now called Australia. And so that kind of led me on the journey and to help to lead particularly Christians, but all peoples in justice. I do believe unless we start with First Nations or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander justice in these lands now called Australia, we have to start there. It's from there, getting that right, that relationship right, that all else can happen. So when it comes to creation and climate justice, I've also said that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander justice and creation and climate justice are actually one of the same. The first acts of colonisation in these lands now called Australia were destruction of creation. With Philip in 1788, he literally landed in a woodland. Cook's first act of colonisation was to shoot us. Philip's first act of colonisation was to cut down the trees. That's the beginning of deforestation in these lands now called Australia. And that impacts where we are today. And globally, to look at Indigenous peoples around the world, you know, we've talked quite a bit over the last 6.5 years about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices in this country, but Indigenous voices around the world when it comes to creation and climate justice are ignored. We only have to look at COP26. Everyone's in tears, and that's great, but none of the actions Indigenous people suggested were taken forward. And we have experienced creation and climate justice the longest. We're not just exhausted from this week, but we're exhausted from 250 years of trying to protect country. Country is all lands, waters, sky, trees, plants, animals, birds, fish, rocks, mountains, and all peoples. We are part of country. And that's capital C with an uppercase country. And so, you know, some of my key theology, and I share this to end as you talked about scripture. And, you know, sadly, it wasn't Christians that helped me find this scripture. It was God that helped me to connect my Aboriginality with my Christianity. And, you know, the 2016 census, 54% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people identified as Christian. So there's many connections. Our culture, this isn't Christian, but our culture, but there's Christian principles in there, which is why a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are Christian, because when we read the Bible, we read it with very different eyes. And so in this moment, I acknowledge Uncle Reverend Graham Paulson, the very first Aboriginal person to be a Baptist minister, and his paper called 5 Smooth Stones. And all those years ago, he called our nation to read the Bible with Aboriginal eyes. And so this is the piece of scripture, and I've written a theological paper on it called What Can the Birds of the Land Tell Us? And I think even in this week, in these lands now called Australia, and as we think about creation and climate justice, and First Nations justice, and building friendship with all of country, protecting all of country, maybe this is where we turn. Job 12, verses 7 to 10. But ask the animals, and they will teach you, or the birds in the sky, and they will tell you. Or speak to the earth, and it will teach you. Or let the fish in the sea inform you. Which of all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind. And so may we find a way to breathe together as humanity and to breathe with all of creation and all of country.
Thank you. Thank you, Brooke. But Sam, perhaps building on that, what has been your own perspective or expression of theology or spirituality in your own life? What does it look like, or how is it realised? And I did sort of, obviously prepare for today, and I came across a curious message from the Catholic Pope John Paul II in 1986, where he told Aboriginal peoples who gathered in Alice Springs that the Catholic Church will be lacking in its full expression if it does not embrace the spirituality of Aboriginal people.
And as a Torres Strait Islander woman, I would say he probably also would refer to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So I think today I'd like to share with you all a Torres Strait Islander perspective of Christianity. And I'm also Aboriginal, but I'm also Scottish as well too, through my father's side of the family. His name is Duff, and so we also have a strong connection to Celtic origins, and through my father, learning about thin places and thin times as well too. So I just acknowledge that part of myself as well. But I was born and raised on Thursday Island or Wyburn in the Torres Strait, and we call that Zenard Kes. So we do have Torres Strait Islander names for the English naming of our country up in the Torres Strait, Zenard Kes. And it's a very multicultural and diverse community, and I'm proud to say that all the Torres Strait Islanders voted yes over the weekend, and I'll leave it at that. So very, and also here in the ACT. But I grew up with my parents and two sisters going to church as a part of normal everyday life. Both Catholic through my grandparents and mother's side, but also through the Anglican Church through my father's side as well too. So both churches were next door neighbours up on Thursday Island. So one weekend we'd go to one church, and the next weekend we'd go to the other church. And that was normal for us. And there would be Torres Strait Islander songs and hymns, a lot of the drums or warrups, very beautiful singing as well too. So it was a celebration, and it was just the normal thing to do, and being taught by nuns and following in my mother's footsteps as well too. So for my family, education was important. My mother left school, I think, at grade 7. My grandfather probably only went to school till he was about, I think, just learning how to read and write, not finishing primary school. So through my mother's side of the family, education was important to all of us. And probably just want to add that I had the extreme fortune to share with my grandfather his life story. And as a pearl shell diver, he shared how important it was when he went under the sea to gather pearl shell for buttons from the 40s, 50s, 60s, until the industry finished up in about the 70s, that some of the values that were instilled into my mother and the rest of his children. So I just want to quickly share Lifelong Ali Drummond, A Life in the Torres Strait. And he speaks of, when working in deeper waters, Ali remembers that the seabed looked like a beautiful garden with pearl shells scattered everywhere. When he was growing up, he'd been told by the old people that every place had a keeper or guardian, even at sea. He was a visitor there, and as a mark of respect, he should always ask permission to take some pearl shell, and when he had collected sufficient, to say thank you. Ali never forgot this practice, and today his children carry on this tradition. Wherever they travel, they always ask permission when visiting a certain area and always say thank you when they leave. And this tradition of respect is always spoken softly. So I think learning from your elders, but also continuing that practice as a First Nations person is something, is a value that is important to all of us, respect. So have many of you heard of the Torres Strait or visited, been to Thursday Island? One person in the audience, couple, yeah, thank you. So yeah, it's great to see, and I encourage you all, if you have the opportunity, to visit. We have a separate flag to the Aboriginal flag. We have a separate identity and a separate history. And I think that history can't be more stark than sharing the coming of the light or the coming of Christianity to the Torres Strait. So every year on the 1st of July, or July 1, as we call it, we celebrate the coming of the light, which is the coming of Christianity, when the London Missionary Society landed at Darnley, Arab Island in the Torres Strait, and brought the light, brought the Bible to the Torres Strait in 1871. And
can I pick that up? Like, for those of us who don't appreciate how that happened, and given a lot of anger in non-Christian Australian communities about the role of missionaries, how to understand how receptive the Torres Strait Island communities were, and yeah, just to appreciate how Jesus was perceived or is understood, given a rich cultural history that it came into.
And I think a part of that reception or that positive embracing of Christianity was that there was no spearing or killing at that stage. A lot of the Samoan missionaries were there and landed, and so there was a bit of curiosity at first. And the vessel was called the Surprise, so I think a fitting name. But when the missionaries landed on Arab Island, they held the Bible up and they presented it to the Torres Strait Islanders. And so there was it's a gift, it's a present. We have to receive it and embrace it. It wasn't, I think that first contact was quite receptive in that there was no threats of violence, and it was presented as a gift and embraced. And it wasn't all white people there, but the dark Samoan people who were part of the, it's okay, we want to just we want to share with you and sit down and talk about it. So Torres Strait Islander beliefs do sit with Christian beliefs, so there is that balance. And I think as we walk this earth, everything is a balance as well too. So the Torres Strait Islander culture is one of openness, sharing, accepting. Again, it's a multicultural, diverse community up there too, so we all have to accept, embrace one another as well. So I think for me, that was that backgrounding to embracing Christianity in the Torres Strait. Unfortunately, I think maybe some of the youth today aren't as, embracing or following, but it's a journey too. And when I grew up, it was a part of family life. So I think we all find our way back. Some of us take a bit longer than the others, but again, it's all coming back to the family. And I'd probably just like to end on a couple of notes in terms of the environment too, that the environment and climate change certainly impacts in the Torres Strait. Even back in the 50s and 60s, Saibai Island, which is very close to Papua New Guinea, it's a very low-lying, flat, muddy island. There were a number of Saibai Islanders who actually moved to Bamaga, mainland Australia, because of the rising tides impacted on the land, or what land they did have there on Saibai. So around December every year, there's a lot of king tides that impact the islands. Seawalls are built. There's a lot of sandbags, but again, the king tides crash through the seawalls as well too. There's a lot of money spent on building seawalls to protect the community. In our practice, our departed loved ones are usually buried in in our yards, you know, so sometimes in a cemetery, but sometimes in the outer islands in our yards. So you may have the situation where the sea, the saltwater sea comes along the road and into people's yards, and unfortunately to much distress, you know, washing away some of those graves as well too. So it's a situation that is getting worse, certainly not getting better. And with the sand changing as well too, it's the start of the Great Barrier Reef as well too. So there's impacts underneath the water as well as above the water. And I think, yeah, just some lessons that I've learned along the way include the importance of learning and valuing knowledges, not only Torres Strait Islander knowledges, but Aboriginal knowledges as well too. Being curious, asking questions, being respectful, listening, observing, watching as well too. Being open, but at the same time being silent as well too. So as you observe, the lessons that I've been taught are about taking what you need as well too, not everything, and that is important, especially when you're looking at life in the sea, like dugongs, turtles, fishes, crabs, prawns. You know, if you take it all, there's not going to be anything left. And also saying thank you, because you know, the sea is plentiful, it is rich, it's a supermarket, but you know, you've got to leave some for the next person too. We all have a responsibility in creation, caring for country. So I guess, you know, what's your responsibility? What will you take away? What will you do from here? And I think just part of that reflection on last Saturday as well too, and that we all have a responsibility, and what are we going to do next from there? But also, if you want to read a bit more, there's a lot of arts and literature out there. There's a lot of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander knowledge in books. So pick it up, learn, and share it with someone else as well. So I think I'll just leave that there. Thanks.
Thank you. I might just get a time check because I'm responsible for time, but I actually don't have a watch. So 25 past 2. Okay. Well, there's so much there. What I'm hearing are some underlying shared spiritual values of openness, respect, gratitude, walking gently on the earth, obviously using the resources of it, but acknowledging it, owning your own choice and owning your own power in all of that, and an approach to mission work that your ancestors have experienced, and that sees the possibilities of gifted exchange, and the godliness in each, the sacred in each of us and in all living things, and not dissimilar to the Franciscan way, which is to engage nature, flora, fauna as subject to subject, not subject to object. It profoundly changes how you engage it, and you are never alone. Very deep and wonderful. Thank you. So I guess there's an opportunity here for you to talk to each other about what you're hearing or what's new to you before I go to Sally. Something that, because it is about, okay, what are the connections, interconnections? And I mean, I think as a person of colour from South Africa with the colonial experience in my own knapsack, and really grappling as a beneficiary of colonialism, arriving as a migrant in the 70s, asking how do I benefit and what are my responsibilities? And then going to elders or others engaged in reconciliation and saying, oh, what do I do? And seeing and hearing a lot of anger, even though there was a hand that was held out. And what was very powerful was a particular elder who said, I've stopped being angry because I recognise that even those who arrive and continue to arrive are broken or come from dislocation or have experienced disconnection, and appreciating the kind of shared gifts but also, and shared stories, but also the shared brittleness almost of each of us, subject to subject. So is there just something in the sort of 5 or 10 minutes we have to reflect on what 3 of you have shared, talking to each other, but of course us? Ruth, especially your pilgrimage and what you've heard from Sam and Brooke. You know, you said earlier that pilgrimage for you this pilgrimage has changed my mind in so many ways. I thought, wow, okay, there's a moment.
Well, I guess it's almost inevitable, I would assume, that if you encounter new friends and you listen deeply, you're going to be changed. So, but I don't say that glibly, because I think it often doesn't happen. But even just, you know, Brooke, I've heard you talk about Jesus as the great unsettler, and you say so much more eloquently than I ever could what that means to you. That has changed my view of the notion of settler, colonizer, invader. You've helped me understand myself better. So I've understood, and way back at the beginning when Joy invited us to come, there was an invitation for us to look at our own hinterland. What do we bring? What's our story? Before coming with all the questions that we might have to the other, come knowing who you are. And I think that invitation already began to change me. Attending the cultural awareness sessions changed me. Staying on land where the degrees and the centigrades are through the roof in my very Scottish way, that has changed me. So from very prosaic to very ordinary encounters, I have been changed. The scarf has changed my perspective on you know, the story of climate justice. But I think, you know, I guess I would go back. I'd want to ask each of you and all of us, where are the moments of change in our lives, and what can we now do together? I guess I'm interested in my hinterland insofar as it impacts where we're going together in the future. I want to learn. I will always want to be a learner. And Sam, I have never been to the Torres Strait Islands, but I would love to go. Not yet. And your story of the receptivity of those first settlers is very moving, and I thank you for that. That will also change my perspective. It still feels crunchy and awkward. So I guess my question to each of us is how are we prepared to be changed, and all of us here, in order to keep our eyes firmly focused on, you know, we talk about, you know, let's just change the climate, and let's just change the way we live in the climate, but it's just change that we want. You can't have reconciliation without justice. We've talked about that for decades within the Iona community. Hearing it mirrored back through your lenses has been so instructive. What justice actions are we willing to take that are uncomfortable, that will make us feel unsettled, disturbed, awkward? And how are we going to then work together to bring about the fairly high level political change that we need? Over to you. And not, yeah.
So just to what I'm listening to and linking with, you know, I'm wearing this climate scarf as well, and maybe Ruth, you can help me lay it out. Can you go from the blue to the red that way? This climate scarf, it tells the story. It's got the science data knitted into it, but there were several key things about what you needed to do with this climate scarf. And particularly, it was about sparking conversations. It was listening to and being led by those listening to and being led by those most impacted by climate change, specifically calling out Aboriginal peoples, Torres Strait Islander peoples, and peoples of the Pacific Island nations. If you do have a scarf, please continue to do that. So as I heard Sam talking, and I had I've been up to the Torres Strait. I have many Torres Strait Islander friends, are friends with the Torres Strait Six, who lead our islands our homes. I've seen the places where your loved ones are buried and their closeness to the water. And I remember 11 years ago when I started out as an Aboriginal Christian leader, Auntie Rose Elu, who's a Torres Strait Islander elder and leader, talking to me about the climate change in the Torres Straits, and I was horrified. I hadn't heard it 11 years ago. As I took it to the churches and different Christian organisations, they didn't want to do anything about it. So let us not forget the journey we've been on, and it's so wonderful to have so many people here today, but we've fought hard, especially in my context for the Christians and churches to come on the journey with us. And then Aboriginal peoples, Auntie Reverend Alex Gator, Wangan Jugalingu woman. And 11 years ago, it's interesting the timing of some of these things too. She called a group of Aboriginal Christian leaders together. Well, she called a lot of people together for a prayer meeting in Musgrave Park, which in Brisbane, Meanjin, where we hold our particularly Aboriginal kind of events. And Auntie Reverend Alex Gator, it was actually only the Aboriginal Christian leaders. There were about 10 of us turned up, even though we'd invited other people. And she pulled out this photo of this little bird. And I didn't know what the bird was. I actually didn't know who her peoples were, and I'm just meeting her. I'd met her like a month before. And it was the black-throated finch. And she talked about this company called Adani, and that her country was in danger. And we had to pray for this little finch, as how precious it was to her, her peoples, her country, and we needed to protect it. I took that story and, you know, it's great people came on the journey, but it's been long work of us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, raising our voices, sharing the differences of our cultures, stories and histories. There's much richness in Aboriginal culture, stories and histories, and Torres Strait Islander stories, cultures and histories. Aboriginal peoples, Torres Strait Islander peoples. And we do have currently 4% of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are both Aboriginal and Torres Strait. And so there's some like yourself as well. But the power of stories. So from Ruth's story to your grandfather's story, pilgrimaging, is that a word? With Ruth. Anyway, I'll claim it. That's, you know, we've got to share story, but even, you know, we've been to different Aboriginal nations. It's not my country. I'm a visitor. And so permission and thanks. That's what our ancient cultures have done. And I've seen Ruth participate in those with me. We've both been visitors to these places. And so, you know, I would love for us to think about, as the nation of Australia, what does it mean for permission and thanks, for friendship and so forth. And I got Ruth to lay out that scarf. You know, my aunt and new friends in the centre of Australia, and we've been talking about the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Don't pack it away. Still truth-telling and treaty to go. We're still the most incarcerated people on the planet. So those words are still important, and that statement's still important. But Uluru is on Ngunnawal country, many who speak Pitjantjatjara language. And my aunt and new friends, and I wrote an article 2 years ago in the Sydney Morning Herald, too hot for ceremony. For the Ngunnawal peoples, it is too hot in the centre of Australia for ceremonies that have taken place for over 65,000 years. And I think we understand that on one level, but for us as peoples, climate change, and I often hear about, you know, we have to come up with migration or climate refugees. You move from your land, if you can't participate in the ceremonies that are part of your life, it's actually, the only word I have for it is a death. And so to realise the urgency of this, and that was what part of the scarf is, and I'm so grateful for Ruth being here in the Iona community and Wellspring community for having these conversations. You know, I haven't had a conversation like this for on creation justice and First Nations justice, I think in 2 years, or at least, no, 18 months, however long since, anyway, my life story. But the urgency of the matter, when I led this action, and there was a lot of resistance to this action for these climate scars, I had to work very hard as an Aboriginal Christian leader. And I thank so many of you. I know many of you have scarves, but this one was specially knitted for me because this is the next 100 years. And Ruth, if you could. Oh, yes. And so kind of use the same data, but change the colors and it starts with the red through to the black. We're in an urgent situation, and to not forget that urgency. And, 11 years ago, I felt that urgency with both Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And really hope that we can work together.
Well, I want to say that I know some of you in the audience and people are tuned in. They are sympathetic, they seek information and they participate. This is a room full of participants. So we don't need convincing, right? And I guess this week, especially on my heart, is the conversations kids are having at school after the referendum. And any practical advice for them, as much as for the adults who can articulate it in other ways, who may have more courage. But especially, I guess, because both of you have come and lived in Queensland, Queensland and Queensland, one of the most religious parts of the country, or the nation, as we call it, Australia. And that disconnect, right, between religiosity and people identifying as Christian, but actually that often meaning a kind of conservatism that means they're not engaged. And so just to quickly share that, we have a daughter, Peter and I, who moved from a public school to a Christian school. And in the public school, everyone's voting yes. There's that conversation about acknowledging country and an appreciation of the deep traumas or wanting to understand that history for themselves as young people. Awesome. Our daughter moved to a Christian school in this city. And this week was brought to tears in sort of social settings where kids are, making something in the art class and they're bragging about how the No campaign won. And Livy, our daughter, was just so upset. Of course, she said the odd thing, but she didn't know what to do and she was shocked. She was actually genuinely shocked. What's the problem? And, we don't want to make this country more racist or racially divided than it is. And so just sort of all these things that clearly have been discussed at home that are informed very much by their parents and their parents' lived experiences. But what's your advice about the tangible things children and young people can do?
I might just continue, and share a poem because I love the climate scars, and I think the arts are also a powerful tool and resource to use to get the message across. And poetry writing is also a powerful tool. So this is a poem called Always Was, Always Will Be. You tell me it's not mine, that it never was, never will be mine. What would you know? You taught me English to read and write. Uncivilized native that I am, what would I know? You clothed and sheltered me, educated me, permitted me to live on your country. What would we know? More than 200 years have gone. Look at how far I've come. My ancestors have lived here from the beginning of time. They've survived, thrived. Languages, art, culture, knowledge, our gifts to the nation. If only you'd listen, always was, always will be. Kama eso. Thank you.
Sam has to head off now. She did say so earlier. So thank you very much, Sam. That's a very fitting poem to finish with. I've got a present for you, so I'll come down. Sally's going to share now something of her story and wisdom along the way is the point, Sally. Thank you.
Actually, I never do public speaking. I'm always behind the scenes in any function. This is the first time, and really, I'm just a fill-in. Other people couldn't turn up, so you have to deal with me. I wanted to, hang on just a minute. I wanted to start with this quote from 1854. You must teach your children that the ground beneath their feet is the ashes of our grandfathers, so that they will respect the land. Tell your children that the earth is rich with the lives of our kin. Teach your children that the earth is our mother. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons and daughters of the earth. I'm not going to go and read everything that I've written down. I'm just going to tell you a tiny bit of my Aboriginal spirituality. Is that okay? My Aboriginal spirituality is who I am. It is my identity. If you want to know me, then meet me in my spirituality. It permeates my whole life, self, relationships, thoughts, emotions, etc., how I live. My Aboriginal spirituality is the centre of my being. It is who I am. I can't escape it. Aboriginal spirituality is the foundation of our culture and our communities. It encompasses our values. My Aboriginal spirituality is centred on the land, the connection to the land. The land is me and I am the land. My grandfather lived this way. The land was him. There was nothing else for him. My own connection to the land is through trees. Have you ever touched a tree and let the tree touch you? Life changes when this happens. It is a spiritual connection that I cannot explain. Feel the tree. Really look at the tree. See the life in the tree. This tree is life. Every one of the tiny, tiny branches is connected to another bigger branch, and the branch is connected to the trunk of the tree. And the trunk of the tree is connected to something deeper that we do not usually see or acknowledge, the hidden roots of each tree. These roots are deep and they spread out. What they are actually doing underneath the ground, it could be called a mystery. Have you sat and really looked into the eyes of a tree? You will see all of creation there. The stillness, the movement, the small insects feeding, and the birds just resting and making their homes in the tree. This is the God moment in my life. It tells me where I am and where I fit into creation. I have always been drawn to the words of Jesus in John's Gospel. I am the vine, you are the branches. This is who we are, who I am, a branch, no matter how small and weak or how big and strong. I am connected to the trunk, the God of creation. When you see the leaves fall off the tree, it does not matter, as a tiny branch still stays, clinging on to the stronger branch, just like what we do, I do, clinging to the trunk, the God of all. My spirituality is different from others because that is who we are. We are each of us unique individuals, but connected to the same trunk, the God of creation. Our ways of connecting to the Creator Spirit, God, the Holy Spirit, are all different, but at least we are connecting, and this is important for our well-being, our faith, and our community. It's the spirit of my ancestors, the spirit of my own people who enliven me in my faith journey. Their strength, their resilience, their struggles, their loss, their beliefs and non-beliefs, and their trust in a higher being have enriched me. They have paved the way for me. They have enabled me to have the same strong, true, and simple beliefs in God the Creator. My own people, the Marawaris, were fighters and warriors, and I have inherited these traits. But they were also silent people, people who revered stillness. I think that because of this inner stillness, they gained strength to be the warriors that they were. I think that this is part of my connection to them and to my country. Aboriginal spirituality is so much more than saying prayers, both personal and communal. To me, that is surface stuff. We all do this, but spirituality is so much more. It is deep, and it is a deep connection within you, a connection to the Holy Spirit and more. It is a connection to the very part of my being with my soul in the hands of God, being moulded each and every minute. But it is even more than that. It is the core of my life, of who I am. I don't feel the need to have to say prayers each day. What I need is being with the Father in a very personal, intimate way. This is what my Aboriginal spirituality is. And I'd like to read you. Everybody would know Psalm 23, but this is Psalm 23, the Aboriginal way. My big fella boss up in the sky is like the father emu. He will always look after me and take me to green grass and lead me to where the water holes are full and fresh all the time. He leads me away from the thick scrub and helps me keep safe from the hunters, dingoes, and eagles. At night time, when I'm very lonely and sad, I will not be afraid, for my father covers me with his feathers like a father emu. His spear and shield will always protect me. My big fella boss always gives me a good feed in the middle of my enemies. In hot times, he makes me sit down in the cool shade and rest. He gives me plenty of love and care all of my life through. Then I will live with my big fella boss like a father emu that cares for his chicks in good country, full of peace and safety, forevermore and evermore. Amen. There you go.
What a terrific retelling of Psalm 23 by Reverend Rowan. Thank you. Well, this is when we kind of gather ourselves. I would like you to have a conversation with somebody near you about what you've taken away from this session. As we take a break, what was the key takeaway? What moved you, or what did you think? How are you perhaps thinking differently? What would be the action that's come out of this for you? To share that with a peer or stranger, someone you know or not, in the aisle, and to then, you know, stretch your legs, take a moment. There's an opportunity to participate in a tapestry that's in the works at the back, where you can take a leaf and write something of significance. But who will chaperone people at the back, Joy, on that front? Is someone? Linda. Okay, great. Excellent.
You're invited to write on the leaf.
You're invited to write on the leaf, exactly. So it's an invitation to participate in that way. But first, get the conversation going with someone near you, and we're going to take 15 odd minutes to do that. Thank you. It's really hard to love something at speed. Right, well, we're coming to the end of our time together, the formal part anyway. And it's your opportunity to make a contribution. We have a mic. Peter held a mic, or did? Peter, are you on task? Think about what you'd like to share with the group and the panel. Something that touched you, or is it obvious takeaway? You know, these are big things, and this space is rather hard to hold, isn't it? Given where we live, what we know, and with knowing even just an inch of very complex history, there is so much pain. So how do we keep hope alive? How do we keep the flame of reconciliation alive? I was really delighted to hear from Brooke that reconciliation is not dead. Of course it's not dead, but that was the headline on Saturday in the Saturday paper, which we faithfully get every Saturday, quoting Indigenous elder Marcia Langton. And my 19-year-old son, who was part of the campaign in Melbourne, went door knocking, was on the phone, participated in acts of solidarity and protests, looked at the headline, shook his head. He couldn't believe it. He was so upset that someone would even say that, especially when we understand that it comes out of relationships. So the relationships haven't gone away. Yes, there's work to do. So this is your moment to tell us what you're taking away, to make a contribution, to share what's come to the fore for you. It may even be just a word.
I just want to say I really appreciate how authentic everybody has been and what you've shared. I have a question that's arisen from my experience here and while I was thinking about things in the previous bit of the pilgrimage on Gragan. Both Scotland and Ireland and First Nations people of Australia have all been colonised one way or another, or felt the impact of imperial settlement or conquering. So I'm wondering if there's parallels or points of identification that we could arrive at that can be of encouragement to First Nations people here in Australia and even to people in Scotland and Ireland. Is there anything that we can share on this?
Happy to? Are you happy for us to collect some other contributions that may be similar or not?
Where's Sally? We need Sally on her share.
She's over here. She's saying no, but
Come on,
Sally.
Not meaning to disagree with you, but having read the Koori Mail this week very thoroughly, and many writers that I know that I've read over the years, the shock was unbelievable to everyone. And Marcia Langton did say, I think it might take 2 generations before we can get that hope back again. I think what happened is it split the whole of us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people really hard, harder than you could have known. So I think they're just reeling to stay upright at the moment. And please, please have your prayers for all of them, for all of us, because it means Australia to us, you know.
I'm going to start a
start my comments with a story. And then I'm going to share some research on climate change in the interior. About 10 years ago, I was working on a Australian First Peoples cattle station, and we were busy the whole time. When we finished, we were rolling our swags and packing our ports and putting them on the back of the Land Cruiser. And just a little way away were 3 beat-up Hilux Toyotas. And these big boxes of things were going on to 3 of them. And the 4th one was taking bedding and women and children and men, and 2 elders, Kumajay Cassidy and Kumajay Cook, were leading them. So I went up to Kumajay Cook and I said, "Hey, Gilby, Nako Nyuntam, where are you going?" And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, we go for missionary. They have Bibles." And I said, "What? Where are you going missionary?" Oh, he said, "They'll go along a Halls Creek, Fitzroy Crossing, Broome, then Martu country, then Nunnathadara country, Nangata Aru country, Hidden country, Yugodadara country, and then we come home." I went home and I measured in my Bible just how long that was, and it equals Paul's travels around the Mediterranean. Those communities still operate. They've been shattered in many areas since the Rudd government in all sorts of bureaucratic ways, which I won't go into. But in those same areas where ambient heat is now starting to be in the summer 51, 53 degrees, where donkeys and camels and cats and wild dogs are wrecking the waterhole, are wrecking the vegetation. The communities out there have enough knowledge of, and a taxonomic one at that, have the capacity to be mobilised to address those infiltration of non-Indigenous species. But what has happened is that we've gone back to social welfare. People are on the dole, they're not on working programs. None of the working programs of the last 40 years have ever had a training element in them that could take people to certificate 3 or certificate 4.
What have you heard today that registers with, what have you heard today that registers with your lived experience and observations of Central Australia?
Your scarves, because that's
too hot for ceremony. Too hot for ceremony.
Too hot for ceremony. Too hot to live.
Yeah.
During COVID-19, they pushed all of the people at risk back out into the homelands, which they withdrew the money from 5 years earlier. We had colour-bond houses with babies in 53-degree ambient heat. In the end, surreptitiously, we were able to move families with small children and non-school children into old, underused motels. But that doesn't solve the problem. The problem is climate change.
Yeah. Thank you. Which kind of does invite reflections on all the contributions, but from the perspective which I'm hearing, which is a reality check about life as it is lived. And, you know, even on a beautiful day like today, at 27 degrees in October, ain't normal. And how do we grieve, recognize what is, but also say, gee, it's a beautiful day, I'm going to enjoy it. You know, what is the takeaway? Given the values we've tested and expressed, a love of country, yearning and longing for justice, believing we have power to make a difference, being asked to sort of thread that all together with nuggets to go home with and a smile on our face, but I'll hand it to Ruth.
Thanks a lot, Tony. Well, all it will be nuggets, or just morsels even. I mean, thank you, Linda, for your question. I guess part of the really honest answer is that, you know, the invitation to look at my own hinterland meant I came here kind of proudly knowing a little bit about my ancestry back to 1692 or something. And then I met people like Brooke and others who can go a fair few generations back beyond that. And, you know, we live in the West, knowing a lot about our immediate history. And I certainly would be one to confess that I don't dwell a lot in my pre-Christian history, and I will more than I have done. But, you know, also to be perfectly honest, like I said earlier, I'm more interested in how together we can move beyond where we are now, because, you know, there's Storm Babette hitting my waking children in their beds in Glasgow, Manchester and London, and they're traveling through Britain today. Now, there's no symmetry here. There's an asymmetrical nature of justice in the world. Some stories need bigger voice than others. I don't for a minute doubt that. But the island of Iona's predicted levels of sea rise mean that the village seafront will be gone in a few years' time. So there's a common bond that does connect us, despite the asymmetry. And I understand that the voice of my ancestors is much, much louder still, and it needs to change. But there's a human bond that connects us. And so the stories of the Highland clearances and the potato famine, the way that people from my tradition talk about the big book of creation and the little book of creation, where the big book is the world, God's first text, if you like, creation. But even the word putting text in there, you think it's not just about words, is it? But it's text in a metaphor. And the little book of creation is scripture, whether that's the Bhagavad Gita or the Quran or the Hebrew scriptures or the Christian scriptures. We share a sense of plowing back into our hinterland. But for me, I have to say it's about moving forward. Where do we go from here? COP28 is upon us. John Bagwan spoke to us in Adelaide about his approach from the Pacific Islands to taking prayer and protest together to these large gatherings. Let's join forces and do that together. So I guess that's my response, Linda, to your beautiful question about the connection. I guess within that, I would also say, I don't know if you've come across somebody called Podrigo Tuama. If you haven't, look him up. Poetry Unbound is his podcast. He'll send you to sleep with his lilting, beautiful Irish tones. He's a good friend, and he would say, I see you, I see you. He makes a point of using, and he'll give you the Irish for this, what it means to connect one-to-one as a human being. That's where I'm interested. The incarnation is in the heart-to-heart conversations that Brooke and I will be having and have had. And that means, you know, 80% listening, 20% talking. There's some basics about common sense for all of us. You know, that means when I listen, I need to turn off the narrative in my head that's preparing my next comment. Otherwise, to what extent am I listening? And I guess that's you know, a discipline for all of us. This is hard work. It's not easy. We call it donut listening where I come from, in the reconciliation world I come from, because if you've ever tried to eat a donut without licking your lips, it's counterintuitive. You can't try it. We'll have a go. It's great fun. It's a great party trick. But the donut listening is listen without preparing your response. It's as difficult as eating a donut without licking your lips. But it's very tiring and it's very costly because you might be changed. Mm-hmm. And we have to enter every single conversation expecting that we might come out a bit different. Otherwise, and if the UN did that, you know, where would we be? The common shock that we face beyond so much, I hear that, and I think of the shock of the Israelis and of the Palestinians, and I think of the shock of still in Rwanda and in Burundi of the peoples decimated, and I think of the Ukrainians, and I think of the Russians, and I think of the Protestants and the Irish in Northern Ireland. We share collective trauma and we carry it. My friends of my generation from Germany carry the weight of the guilt of the Nazi regime and National Socialism, and they are not to blame, but they carry the weight. All of us in this room carry different weights. It's not symmetrical, it's complicated, but I certainly feel it, and I'm feeling it differently having listened to more voices. And I think my only other comment would be that community is part of the answer. It's not the only thing. But if you're interested in this kind of level of heartfelt conversation that's going to change and it's rooted in spiritual stuff, then join with others in community and join in meta communities, communities of communities. Wellspring is here, you know, Benedictus, the Day Spring community in Adelaide. Where were we on Tuesday? That other town. Apologies. Iona community, there are many.
The Quakers.
The Quakers are a remarkable community. So find others, allies, friends, and talk about tough stuff. Lots of phones. There's something happening in the world.
Yes, talking and listening. And I think you're suggesting it's more 2080 rather than...
Oh, 80-20, yes.
Yeah.
80 listening, 20 talking, what did I say?
Yeah. Well, coming out of an Anglican tradition and worshipping in an Anglican tradition, which is very wordy, right? Intercessions are all words. It's a shock to go to a Quaker community or a Benedictine where there are 15 minutes of silence in the middle. It's so refreshing. And again, what is prayer? You say pilgrimage, penitence, and prayer. Where is listening and where is the space for it? Thank you. Brooke.
I'll start with just two stories, and they both happened in the week leading up to the referendum. One of them was I was running a professional development session for 300 people, and particularly on Aboriginal spirituality and Christianity, and actually deep listening, which is our Aboriginal cultural practice. Many of you would be familiar with Miriam Rose Ungermer-Bowman's academic work. In her language, it's Dadidi, but for each of our nations, we had our own word for what is that deep listening. It's listening with not just your ears, but with your ears, your eyes, your mind, your heart, and your whole being. And as Aboriginal people, we're taught to do that from a very young age. And you listen to country, and I already told you about country. But in that session, the final question that I got was, but what's your other cultural heritage? Why do you only talk about your Aboriginal heritage? And on my dad's side, my non-Indigenous side, it's Scottish and English heritage. My Aboriginal great-grandmother had to marry a German man, so we have German heritage as well. And I know those stories, but what happens here in these lands now called Australia is it's only ever Aboriginal people's cultural heritage that's ever put under the microscope. And we're the ones that have to explain our non-Indigenous heritage. So the first question for me, and I've said this for a long time, we have to know our stories. Our stories bring the richness and they bring them in. So I would love every, and I don't have a good word for this, but white Australian to know their story. How did your families come to be here in these lands now called Australia? That's part of your story. And I've said for a long time, I haven't got to yarn with Ruth about this yet, but particularly if you find out you have Scottish and Irish heritage. And I know lots of my white Australian friends who've been to Scotland and Ireland on their own pilgrimages to find their family stories. You can connect with land and language and even dispossession, like clan. We got clans, and that's how our stories come together. We've got to learn those languages. So I hope that this spurs on people to learn their story so that we can sit down and talk about it. And I forgot to share the second story. It was, I took my mum to pre-poll and I just asked the lady wearing her shirt with "No to the Voice of Division." I asked her why. And I did that quite calmly. And after being told we get $40 billion from the government and extra benefits, and telling her I was a chartered accountant and it's not true, to getting told I've never been to Alice Springs. And I said, no, I've been to Alice Springs. And she's like, you couldn't have ever been to Alice Springs. To then the final straw being, well, this is what she said, I'm Indigenous because I was born here. And so we've got to learn, and I've copped that my whole life. And we've got politicians who say that, parliamentarians. And so we've got to listen to each other. I called on our nation, and I will continue to call to listen with love and compassion, but we have to understand that listening. And so thank you, Ruth, for that 80-20. So then, where was the last question or response that we had? Or actually it was something Tony said. So when you're out in nature, so how we listen to country, and Ruth touched on this, but I'm bringing another kind of perspective, is that isn't my phone, is it? That's my alarm, but it's on someone else's phone. That's the noise it makes. Sorry. Like if you're looking at nature and you see, or even this site, it's got a story and it's beauty and who helped to do the things, but to actually listen to country. So if you're coming with a love, a pride, you can't listen to the other story that's coming in. So it's kind of like an emptying of yourself, or an 80-20 rule, or I can't wait to eat my next donut. And then finally, I have said reconciliation is not dead. Some Aboriginal people like Noel Pearson and Marcia Langton have said it's dead. And I've always said that I await the day diversity of Aboriginal opinion is something to be celebrated and condemned. We're all dealing with this in a different way. So that's my way. Even though I've got 43 years of life, how we process things, but our elders have been through so much, and the leaders that have gone before us, and they will process things differently. And across the board. And that's why I said it's important we don't say all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and actually recognise our leaders. Noel Pearson, Marcia Langton, Auntie Jean Phillips, Uncle Reverend Graham Paulson, Uncle Pastor Ray Minnicon. Don't just go with the names the media give you. Actually, who are your friends and what is our leadership? And what are the ways we lead in? See us for our different leadership as well. And so even like I ran education sessions and I showed, the Uluru Dialogue and Yes 23 and Uluru Dialogue, Megan Davis and Auntie Pat Anderson. Yes 23, Rachel Perkins, Noel Pearson, Thomas Mayo, Dean Parkin. And then I talked about the group that was Treaty Before Voice, Uncle Coco Wharton. He's a senior elder in Brisbane who's fought for justice and, has helped to grow me up. Then the Black Sovereign Movement, people like Uncle Gillamichael Anderson, and Uncle Sam Watson's son was there, and many others. It's been a big week. To then, behind the No campaign, the Aboriginal leaders, Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa Price, Warren Mundine, And so not just the campaigns and the slogans, but who are we as individuals and what do we bring as leadership? And the stories I told about climate change and impacting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the extra bit I didn't go to when that happened 11 years ago, it's that story about are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people part of Australia or are we not? Because I was seeing all the Christian organisations wanting to do climate stuff with the Pacific. And even this week, the Prime Minister's had a big ceremony with the Prime Minister of Fiji. And he was set as a peacemaker, and then they're shooting cannons. And I'm like, we've got peacemakers, but we brought out the army, the navy, and cannons. I was like so confused that, you know, this is climate change is impacting Australia if Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are part of Australia, but in very specific ways. And so it's Australia and the world.
Thank you so much. Our formal thanks then to Brooke and Ruth. If you could applaud them, thank you. Joy is going to speak in a moment, but my takeaway, if I could offer it, I mean, I really, the natural universe, nature, land, country is the first Bible. You know, it teaches us so much. I love Sally's gift to us, her connections, engaging a tree, which really spoke at so many levels, Didari, and hearing about our obligation to hear and feel and do reciprocity, that in listening there's an openness, a curiosity, but it's how reciprocity happens and general receptivity. So thank you for the opportunity to help steer or shepherd the conversation today. It's been a pleasure. And now I'm going to hand over to Joy.
I'm just a thank you person, but I think my takeaway is, having spent a long time organising this pilgrimage, that the way we get change is networks. And they talk about there being something thin as gossamer between heaven and earth, but there's the tiniest things that connect people across this country. And those connections are what is the power of people of goodwill. And I think that's what we all have to nurture and give strength to those. And I'd like to read to you some of the people who'd actually helped this pilgrimage happen, because we couldn't have done it without them. First of all, there's the Australia Today, the Australian Centre for Christianity and Culture, and I'd like somebody, and I think it better be Jonathan, to come out, and there's a present for your morning tea and some blessings for all of the people on the staff. Thank you. Because it's the open-heartedness of people, open to new things, open to small and large, that make the difference and make our world worth living in. Then I have a thank you to the Care for Creation group, who did all the work. All the work in Canberra. I keep forgetting that although I've got an enormous voice, it's not as big as that. The people in Canberra, look, we have got people like Marjorie, that the cutest and smallest girl here, who's worked so hard. We thank you so much, Marjorie. Thank you so much, Marion. We thank you so much, Robbie. And we thank the other part of that CL Care for Creation group, which is Sally and Roger, who are part of how do I say it? I'm not very good at my Latin. How do you say it? Laudate Si, which have worked really hard together to pull off today, and do so much work. The other person I'd like to thank is Fiona, our communications person in Wellspring, who has worked so much time, often with a twin over her shoulder, having had a very productive family this year. All of those people have worked hard to bring off across Australia opportunities for people to listen to people that they would never otherwise hear. Then they're the people who've helped fund us. And we've got to thank the Quakers. We have to thank the Thanksgiving Fund, who have been very, very generous and helped get people around Australia. We have to thank the Peace and Social Justice Fund, who are helping pay for cultural training and for help with a whole lot of other things. Then the Jan de Brooke Peace Fund, who've helped us again, and the Catholic Mission Sisters, who've paid for an enormous number of things that helped us get to Alice Springs. And then we have the Wellspring Community of Australia members who've been more than generous in getting us going, and the Iona community who've lent us their leader for a whole 5 weeks, free of charge, might I mention. All we had to do was feed her and house her. And so we are very, very aware of how much good things depend on goodwill and connections. And I've got presents for all of them. I won't make them all trot up here. I'll be here all day. So I'll walk around and give it to them. But thank you all. And thank you particularly for Tony, for coming into a space where she didn't know everybody and working really hard to understand what was going on and doing a lovely job. So thank you. Let's put our hands together. And finally, we have a card which unfortunately I have run out of, otherwise I'd give you one each. But we've only got those for people getting presents, which is a picture painted by an Aboriginal artist just for this pilgrimage, by Catherine Dodd, for a Parawal, a Gangari artist, grinding stone, Biri language from Cape York. And that's the painting. You'll have to look at it before and you'll realise how amazing it is. And we have a blessing that was given to us by another of our Aboriginal members, Naomi, who lives in, who's actually a Trullaway woman from Tassie. And this is the blessing that she gave us to use for the back of our card. And it comes from Auntie Betty Pike, a Noongar woman from West Australia. So we're being very eclectic about our connections. And this is a blessing for every single one of you here today. May you always stand as tall as a tree, be as strong as the rock Uluru, as gentle and still as the morning mist. Hold the warmth of the campfire in your heart, and may the Creator Spirit always, always walk with you. And then a second one, which you got from over the other side of the world. When you are deep in the earthy, messy thick of it, may you remember to look up at the stars. Thank you for this afternoon, and God's blessing be with you. That's gorgeous. That's gorgeous. I'll give you yours, Sylvia. That's yours.